Right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the March Cabinet. Could we start with apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, apologies from Councillor Philip Cawthorne.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest before the meeting tonight? Councillor Mills.
Declare a non-pecuniary interest in respect of item 5 for the reasons as set out in my member's declaration.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Agenda item 3 is to approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting, shown on pages 1 to 16 of the agenda. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
I confirm that the items marked in Business Mark Part 1 will be considered in public, and these are reports 5 to 12, and reports 12A to 14 will be held in Part 2, and that's the private part of the Cabinet meeting. So moving on then to the first report tonight, it's page 17 of the agenda, agenda item 5, Social Services, Housing and Public Health Policy Overview Committee. It's a review of raising standards in private sector rented accommodation. In the absence of Councillor Cawthorne, I will formally move this report and ask Councillor Wayne Bridges to step forward and speak to us.
Thank you, Cabinet, for considering our reports and inviting me to present the Policy Overview Committee's review into raising standards in private sector rented accommodation. Due to the national housing crisis, the private rented sector has become increasingly important as a form of housing provision. Our review looked at advice and guidance regarding rights and responsibilities relating to standards. This enables people to make informed decisions about their housing options. We found that since the last Housing Conditions Survey, the number of people using the private rented sector had risen rapidly, and so there was a clear responsibility on the Council to ensure it took positive steps where possible to assist and improve the quality of life for our residents in this sector. We examined the profile of the sector and its tenants, along with the effects of overcrowding and the health implications. The review suggested that overcrowding might well be increasing, driven by a necessity to accept lower housing standards to minimise costs. However, the committee also recognised that as the Council has limited influence in the sector, there was no single solution that could be taken to solve all the problems associated with today's housing needs. We welcome news that the enforcement options available to the Council would be strengthened by the Housing and Planning Bill when passed, but appreciate these measures would focus on the most serious and severe instances of malpractice by landlords. I would like to end by taking this opportunity to thank residents and witnesses for their contributions to our inquiry that made this review possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bridges. Are there any comments on this report? It's a very comprehensive report, Councillor, and I'd be grateful if you would take thanks of Cabinet back to your committee for producing this. It's a very important area, and all of the recommendations that you put forward to us will have our support. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, page 53, Hillingdon Local Plan Part 2, the Draft Development Management Policies, Sites Allocation and Designations and Policies Map. Now, when considering this report, please also refer to the appendices which are shown separately. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Leader. In moving this report before Cabinet this evening, we've got to remember that the local plan is always moving, and as you've already mentioned in the separate appendices, page 1 to 162 is part of that moving agenda. Now, the report provides a summary of the representations we received in response to our revised proposed submission version of the local plan, and it was issued following public comments over the 6-week period, 26th of October to the 8th of December 2015. And it sets out our officers' responses to the representations that we received and recommends an approach to addressing outstanding objections and seeks approval to submit the document for public examination. So the recommendations are on page 54. There are 6 of them, and I so move them and recommend them to Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Burrows. Any comments on this report? We know that recommendation 6, this is coming back to a future meeting of Cabinet following the outcome of the public examination process, so we will get it back in due course. So, are the recommendations 1 to 6 agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 7, page 69, local flood risk management strategy, and again there are appendices shown separately in the appendices pack to be considered when considering this report. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. As you rightly say, there are 100 pages of appendices in the pack, and here they are in glorious detail. It's fair to say that as a borough we're pretty lucky in the flood risk issue. We are fairly low on everybody's radar. We don't have much of a problem. Many boroughs have huge problems, and we've seen it on the TV over the last few months, but luckily we are not one of them. That's not to say we don't have any problems. We do, but it's a fairly minor level. Under the 2010 Act, we are obliged to produce and provide a local flood risk management strategy, and for it to be published on our website. And this is the 2015 version of that strategy, which is before us tonight. It sets out in enormous detail what steps we're taking and where, and it's a pretty comprehensive document, and hopefully will stand us in good stead if disaster does strike in any part of the borough of this nature. There are 2 recommendations on the top of page 70, which I propose we adopt. I so move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. You mentioned the Flood and Water Management Act 2010, which is the one that requires us to review these strategies. I note that in the appendices there is currently reference to the European legislation, which, of course, on this occasion we will have to take into account, but perhaps not next time. Recommendations 1 and 2 agreed. Thank you. Right, we now move to the Agenda B, which is Agenda Item 8, and this is a revised scheme for financing schools. Councillor Simmons.
Well, thank you, Leader. I don't think there's a particularly European dimension to the way that schools are funded, though doubtless somebody could probably think of one. But the scheme for financing schools is the document which sets out the way in which the council will interact with maintained schools when it comes to a range of different financial matters, anything from procurement to the payment of expenses to school governors, to the cash management of schools, the availability of loans, a very wide range of different matters. You'll be aware from the budget that took place yesterday that it is likely by 2020, and certainly in all cases by 2022, that schools will become academies. And academy schools are already separate from the processes which are outlined in the scheme for financing schools. But we've taken the opportunity to update it in a number of areas, and I commend the report that's here with the updates contained in it to Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Back to the main agenda then. Agenda item 9 is on page 75, and it's the Council Budget 15-16 month 10, Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. As you say, this is month 10, which is January, and again, a good news story. The net underspend in year is, to all intents and purposes, £1.5 million, and that in itself is a small improvement on the previous month of 63,000. So it's going in the direction we expected it to, and certainly we anticipated when we passed this year's budget a few weeks ago. There are a number of recommendations at the bottom of page 75 and at the top of page 76, which I move. I think it's worth noting also that, having talked briefly about the revenue account, that on the capital front, the underspend is continuing much as we expected, and in the same general direction. And this is a good step. And further down, one can see that prudential borrowing is looks to be 4.25 million lower than we assumed at the outset, budget setting back in February 2015. So all these things are pointing us in the right direction. Of course, we're now in the new year, and these last couple of months of summer is therefore tend to get a bit lost, but they are nonetheless important to note. But I move the recommendations as discussed.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
I'd just like to bring people's attention to recommendation 5 as another example of very good partnership working between Uxbridge College and ourselves. In Uxbridge wanting to do something to celebrate a bit of legacy for their 50th anniversary, the area in front of the Hayes campus, which could probably be pushing it to describe it as an unused park. It's just a bit of green, muddy piece of land. So here was an opportunity to actually bring it up to a standard, and a combined partnership with their contribution and the 80,000 that we are suggesting will ensure that once again another part of the borough is enhanced to the green standards that we are getting used to, and it's a real example of a pop-up park.
Thank you. Looking at the recommendations, recommendation 1 is to note the forecast that we have before us. 2 is to note the continued delegated authority that the Chief Executive and myself have regarding the appointments of consultancy and agency assignments. These are shown in Appendix F at page 119 and are very similar to most months. It's quite important that we continue to maintain this discipline and report back to Cabinet each month. Recommendation 3 is asking Cabinet to approve the release of a grant of £38,846 from the Department of Work and Pensions relating to universal credits. We are a delivery partner. We have an agreement in place to deliver support to UC claimants, and this funding is agreed to cover the period November 15 to March 16. It's paid to us monthly in arrears. Recommendation 4 is approving the appropriation of the former Parkview Day Centre site and the former Meadow Day Centre in Hayes from the General Fund to the Housing Revenue Account to enable us, as we agreed in June of last year, to develop these into units, 88 units at Grassy Meadow and 60 units at Parkview for the borough's elderly residents who are most in need of extra care. And I'm really pleased that we were able to do this and move this on. Recommendation 5 you've covered, Councillor Mills. I think, as you said, Councillor Bianco, we're coming towards the end of the financial year now, and when we look at this position, to be £1.5 million ahead in our budget is extremely good. We will end the year with around £40 million in free reserves, and as we saw at council tax setting last month, Hillingdon is in a strong financial position due to our continued management of the financial affairs of this council, and we are in a solid position to enter the new financial year. So, with that, our recommendations 1 to 5 agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 10, the planning obligations, quarterly financial monitoring report. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Leader. This is our quarterly financial report that Cabinet get regarding the 106 and the 278 agreements that come from planning obligations. Officers continue to work with developers, and it's very clear that developers want to come into Hillingdon and work within Hillingdon with us from the amounts that we actually hold. We do allocate these as quickly as we can, and I do hold regular meetings with officers to get these monies allocated to ensure that we do this on a timely basis and we don't have to return any monies. And obviously this helps the council with its objectives of our built environment, our heritage and civic pride, as well as coming into our financial management. We are very good at managing these, and I know, Leader, that you just want to make a comment when I've presented this to Cabinet. So the recommendation there is that Cabinet notes the updated financial information attached at Appendix 1, and with that said, I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Burrows. No, the only comment I would make to Cabinet is could you each review your areas of responsibility in here and make sure, and I'm sure we are on top of what is going on. We do pretty well with the 106 and 278 agreements. So that was my only comment. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Leader. Just two observations. One was regarding the fact that clearly quite a significant element of balances relate to things in the field of education and children's services. Now, later on, we have the paper on the Schools Capital Programme. I think that was just a word of reassurance, really, that as we all know, we are going through a significant period of growth in secondary school numbers. There are a number of sites which are in discussion, where we are in discussion with schools at the moment about the provision of extra places. So although that is a fairly significant number, as we found in the past with primary school places, it's likely that that money will get out the door fairly quickly. And in the spirit of European cooperation, I think we should also note the item about air quality and the funding for that on page 126, because clearly without EU air quality limits, we probably would already have a third runway at Heathrow. And I'm sure we will be pressing, should Britain decide to leave the EU, for our Parliament very swiftly to ensure that British law enshrines those for the continued protection of our residents.
Thank you. Is the recommendation agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, agenda item 11, page 161. This is a school capital programme update. Councillor Simmons.
Well, thank you, Leader. I touched on the point about expansion in the previous item, but this is an update, as we have at every Cabinet meeting, about the progress that we continue to make, including the residual works that are being done to ensure continued availability of primary school places. Just a few weeks ago was offer day for secondary schools, and once again Hillingdon does continue to perform very well in the number of our residents who get either their first choice or one of their top choices, but the number is beginning to go down a little bit each year. So I think it shows the urgency of ensuring continued availability of places, and of course for there to be choice there needs to be a little bit of spare space within the overall schools estate anyway. I think the biggest concern which Cabinet needs to be aware of is with the progress on the Abbotsfield and Swakeleys schools projects. I would draw the contrast with what's happened at Northwood School. All three of these projects are part of the Government Priority School Buildings programme, and we negotiated with David Laws, the former Schools Minister at the Department for Education, that Hillingdon would manage directly the Northwood School rebuild, which is due to be completed this September, and a number of councillors, including Councillor Bianco, joined me for the topping out at that school site just a few weeks ago. We were able to see the fantastic progress that's been made and to hear that the numbers of applications significantly growing exactly as we expected means that the additional capacity will be used in the first year for children starting school at Northwood in September. By contrast, the Education Funding Agency are managing directly the Abbotsfield and Swakeleys rebuilds. They are a good year behind schedule and have not yet been able to start on site because they're not yet in a position to sign the Section 106 agreements relating to various elements of the projects. So we have been pressing ministers for an urgent meeting about this because it is clearly not acceptable for further delays to occur. We do need capacity in both of those schools, but particularly at Abbotsfield, which is becoming a mixed school, to make sure that the growing numbers of children can be accommodated. And whilst there clearly are things that we could do to make that happen in the short term, a proper rebuild of the school is what's really required to give it the new start that it needs, both in terms of its standards, but also just the simple challenges of managing a building, which probably hasn't changed since the leader was there. Just a few years ago, I admit, but roofs can deteriorate quite fast in the Hillingdon climate. So I think we just need to be aware of that. It is a continued cause for concern, and probably evidence of why it would be better if we'd been managing all three projects. That was not the decision that government took, but it is, I think, one of our key priorities to get that moving again.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. It's a point well made. The reason that this came to pass was that we were not happy with the standard of build that the Education Funding Agency would actually fund. It wasn't what we would accept in Hillingdon, so we said we would pay literally millions more to bring it up to standard, but we wanted to control the build, and the Minister in his wisdom said you can control one and we'll let the government agency control the other. Now, as we've heard, Councillor Simmons was out topping out of the one we controlled last week, so Lothan has planned in September, and the others haven't even got a spade in the ground yet. I mean, that's we know we did well on the primaries, and it's just a marker against what others can do or can't do. This is a sound programme. It's something that our officers do well, deliver on time, on budget. So we will now have to look at bringing forward our expansion of some of the other schools to take up some of the slack and wait for the Education Funding Agency to come up, but we do have that in hand. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 12, page 169, the proposal to establish a housing zone for the Hayes area. Now, this report covers a number of portfolio areas, and I will assume day-to-day responsibility because of that. But tonight I'll ask Councillor Mills, perhaps you could be kind enough to move the first part of this report, the part of it in part 2, but if you could move part 1, please.
Thank you, Leader. And in doing so, I move the recommendations that are on page 170. Members will be aware that I have spoken about Hayes as being an opportunity and changing for a number of times, and we've seen evidence, starting first of all with the old vinyl factory, and then of course with the Crossrail station being rebuilt, and recently Nestle site being closed down and a new developer moving in and starting to have discussions with the planning department here about what kind of mixed development would be suitable on that particular site. So there's a lot going on in Hayes anyway. Most of it is driven by the Crossrail development and private developers coming in. What this housing zone gives us the opportunity is, in partnership with the GLA, is to access another significant pool of money, well, certainly in excess of 45 million, over a long period, to enable us to work with both the private sector and public sectors to join up those pieces of land and those opportunities where it isn't necessarily obvious from any other stakeholder from the cards that they're holding. And it gives us the opportunity, therefore, to take Hayes and the area that we have defined, which is in the appendices, a strategic view to maximise the opportunity that all this development provides for the area. In addition to that, it also gives us some financial muscle to actually ensure that we can deliver a better fit of homes, and in particular maybe create more affordable homes and overcome some of the normal financial viability problems which anyone who sits on the planning committee will be aware of when they read those reports. Developers having to argue the case that affordability in this part of the world is difficult because of land values, construction costs, etc., etc. And this additional money will just give us the opportunity to help smooth some of those situations. So this is to be welcomed. This increases our capability. This is an exciting time to build on what is already an exciting time for Hayes, but it doesn't happen overnight. And one has to be patient, but the benefits will support all the work that we're doing as a council in conjunction with the TfL and Mayor Boris's funding to improve Hayes as a town centre. So it's, I think it's double good news.
Splendid.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. I think the key benefit to this is the delivery of additional housing units across all tenures, and we need to make that quite clear. This will include new social housing stock as well as other stock for people to purchase. It is an exciting time for Hayes, and this will, I'm sure, be, as you say, a good news story for them. If there are no other comments, are the recommendations agreed? Thank you. We now move to part 2 of the meeting. So could members of the public please leave the room? Thank you.